that up. Okay. All right, so welcome to IN's webinar on our needs assessment that we have conducted over the last several months. Today, we're really talking about results and next steps. I am glad to see a few familiar faces and a couple other folks. Thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate your time today. I am Shelby Bates, the Education and Outreach Program Coordinator for IN, and with us is Tracy Murphy, who's our Executive Director. I will let her just say hi or whatever you
Hello,
want.
everyone. Thanks for coming.
As we go, I'm going to kind of give you an overview of the results and things, and then Tracy is going to do the later half of the presentation and really talking more about those next steps. Just a few housekeeping pieces. If you want to connect with others, you're welcome to put in the chat who you are, where you're from, anything like that. We've hosted a few of these where people from different regions of the state were able to connect, so that's an option for you to use if you want. You can also put questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, and we will have time at the end to have more of an open conversation and a live Q&A if there's something you really want to talk about that calls to you during the presentation. When you're not speaking, if you could stay on mute, that's super helpful, I think, for others to be able to hear well. And this is being recorded, and I will send that out later. We will also have a written copy of the needs assessment that I'll also send out as a follow-up. So you can have both options if, again, you want to reference something later. Tracy is managing the questions in the chat as well, so she might interrupt me to say that we have a question. For the presentation layout, we'll start with a little history of what this needs assessment was. Then we will go into more who the respondents were, and we will finish with talking about the results and again, those next steps. And just as a really brief introduction, IN is a nonprofit that advocates for college access for students with intellectual disabilities in Colorado. We really work with colleges and universities to open their doors to this population. We raise awareness of the options. The schools themselves are offering those services on campus. And so part of our work is looking at the future. That is kind of why we did a needs assessment. We first did one 5 years ago before there were any college options for students with intellectual disabilities in Colorado. That needs assessment really just looked into, is this something that students are interested in? It found that 85% of respondents to that needs assessment 5 years ago were unsatisfied with the post-high school opportunities. It also found that 80% of students did prefer in-state options, really calling to the need for Colorado to have college options in our state for students with ID. 46% of the students had no preference to the type of school, and so kind of what we ended up with is one community college and 2 state universities who currently offer those options. That original needs assessment really helped again with that establishment of these initial options in Colorado that have now been in existence for 5 years, which brings us to our goals for this year. In April, we opened the survey, but before that, we really were just trying to kind of figure out what are the main things that we want to learn. So our goals were who's going to college, who isn't, and why. Trying to look within the ID population at where some of the gaps were and who has access to the options in our state. We were also looking at where are programs, supports, or other interventions needed within the state or within different areas, within different resources, things of that nature, which we'll get much more in depth in a few minutes. Our aim is to be able to use the results from the needs assessment, again, to identify some of those gaps, to look at what some of the true barriers are. What I run into in talking to a lot of folks is just looking at maybe an assumption about why students aren't going to college, but we wanted to really see what were some of the true barriers that families themselves are reporting about their experience trying to access college. We also wanted to be able to compare different subgroups, which again we'll talk about, but looking at things like students who need 24/7 medical care, or maybe students who identify as different race or ethnicities, just different groups that again we'll get into later, and then make plans for future expansion. You might hear Anne talk about expansion a lot, and I think it's important to note that that is referring to physical colleges. So, in addition to the three that we have, looking at expansion to more schools, also expansion in terms of awareness, education, and outreach. So, really looking at what we're doing to reach students before they get into college and within the existing programs to address different needs. A concrete example would be more financial resources and looking at how to address those, which is something we've done over the past few years. So that's just the brief history, brief overview of what this needs assessment was. Again, the survey went out in April, it was open until July, and this is just the results of what we heard. In terms of who responded, we had 272 respondents. 196 of those were included in the final reporting. It was really important to us that the responses that we are sharing in our final data align with students who are eligible for these sorts of inclusive higher education programs, have an interest in going to college, that the survey responses were complete so that we had information we could actually share, that the student did have a documented intellectual disability, that they live in Colorado. It's great to see a few responses from out of state, but we're really looking at those barriers specific to students in our state. And the survey respondents were between ages 5 and 40. We had a couple folks with 1-year olds and then a couple folks over 40, but in general, their responses didn't align with the rest of the responses. And so, just to keep it really clear on who we were talking about, those were the parameters that we used. In terms of the disabilities, lots of folks reported just a general intellectual disability. And then the other ones that were common were autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, epilepsy, fetal alcohol syndrome, Fragile X, learning disability, traumatic brain injury, and then a wide variety of different genetic and chromosomal based disabilities. What we found is that the prevalence of our responses by disability were in alignment with those that are reported by CDE. So the percentage of respondents with autism we had would be what we'd expect for the state at wide. So we felt pretty good about the diversity in terms of the disabilities. And again, within each of those, the student would qualify under an intellectual disability, meaning that they're using modifications, they're eligible for their school district transition program, they're using a variety of different community resources. We looked at several factors to kind of look at, does this person have the sort of disability that would be best served by these sorts of programs? For the respondent age, I was very happy to see that the majority of the respondents were in that 15 to 17 and then ages 18 to 21. Again, we have some students that are on the opposite ends there, going down to under age 9 and then up to that 30 to 35 age range. But it was, I think, really helpful to have a good number of students, 15 to 17 and 18 to 21, to compare those different groups and to look at some commonalities and differences. This is just showing you briefly the region map. We're going to talk throughout the presentation about different parts of the state. So in really brief, you have North Central, which is kind of like your Fort Collins and Greeley area. You have Metro, which is your Denver and your Boulder areas. Pikes Peak would be like Colorado Springs and Pueblo. Got the northeast corner, southwest corner, kind of by Durango, would be a big city there. West Central would be like Delta, Montrose, Mesa, Grand Junction, and then Northwest. This is really important to us as a statewide organization. We really looked throughout our time collecting the survey to make sure that we had representation from these areas. This graph is showing you a comparison of the CDE population of students with intellectual disabilities by region. So that's your first one, the blue. So in your metro area, it's about 55% of students with intellectual disabilities live in the metro area in Colorado. Then you have the survey respondents. So our survey had a little overrepresentation of folks from the metro area, with almost 70% of respondents being from the metro area. And just for fun, we looked at the gray, which is the current enrollment of students in inclusive higher education. So that's kind of the one piece with the metro area. The other piece then is we do have an underrepresentation of students from North Central, Northwest, and West Central in terms of the enrollment of students in inclusive higher education. You'll see with West Central, we do have an overrepresentation, only slightly. So I think that was good to see from West Central that we did have responses in alignment with a number of folks from that region. But with North Central, we do have an underrepresentation of respondents as well as those enrolled in inclusive higher education. While those are underrepresentations, it is important to note that there are students enrolled from across Colorado. I think sometimes we hear that there are no students from Western Colorado who have enrolled in the options available in our state. And in fact, there are students really from across state who have enrolled. Anyways, again, this is just to give you a brief overview of the demographics of survey respondents and then a little comparison to where we would have expected those responses to be. For race and ethnicity, a similar graph here, just showing you the CDE numbers, our survey respondents, and then those who are enrolled in inclusive higher education. The two big things to point out: there is an overrepresentation of students who identify as white in our survey responses, and as well as in inclusive higher education enrollment in Colorado. And then there is an underrepresentation of students who identify as Hispanic Latino in both the survey and inclusive higher education enrollment. And so this, I think, is a really significant area to attend to and to recognize that that is a reality in our state and is something that does need to be addressed. And again, we'll get more into responses after we go through just a few more of the demographics. The other piece was the annual household income. We had an overrepresentation of respondents with an income over $100,000. That would be their family's reported household annual income. For comparison, entering college freshmen typically have a family median income of $74,000, and the census data shows that the median family income in Colorado is $72,000. Again, just putting this out there to be very transparent in who our respondents were. All right, so if there are any questions on the demographic piece, I'm happy to answer those. My suspicion is there's not going to be a lot of questions because that's just the overview of who the respondents were. And the more exciting piece, I think, is the results. Okay. The first kind of set of questions we asked folks about in the survey, and the survey was really written for the individual with an intellectual disability to respond. So any questions that say you is really asking about their experience, but the survey was open for families to complete. A parent could have completed it independently. How it was completed may have looked different for each family, but that's kind of just the difference there. So for this question, have you received information about college options for students with intellectual disabilities from your school or teacher? 72% of respondents said no, they have not received information from their school or teacher about college. Students who were ages 18 to 21 were slightly more likely to receive information than students who were ages 15 to 18. I think that's really in alignment with what IN sees frequently, that teachers might be more likely to talk to families as a student is getting older and they're kind of seeing how feasible maybe they might think college is. And we're really encouraging, I think, to reach younger families so they have more time to think about college and prepare. In looking at who said yes to this question, who has received information about college, there were no trends by region or school district, suggesting it is very much still at the teacher level, where you might have one teacher who is in a specific county or school district who's doing a lot of the information sharing, but it might not be district-wide. Another interesting thing that came up in terms of information about college is that 47% of respondents knew about the current college options in Colorado. So that would
Um,
be, hi, sorry, does someone have a question? Okay. So 19% of folks have received information about college, and 47% know about the college option, suggesting families are still receiving this information if they don't receive it from the school or the teacher. So there might be other ways they're getting that information still. And again, this is just kind of to show the results and what we found, and then to talk more about collaborations and how we can work together to maybe change some of these things. But again, just an interesting note that more families know about the options, but don't know about them from their school or their teacher. The next questions were about satisfaction with the current college options in Colorado. The majority of respondents, 40%, said they don't know enough to answer this question. And then those that were either very satisfied or somewhat satisfied were about even with folks who expressed dissatisfaction with the current options. The three commonalities with folks who expressed dissatisfaction were students who required 24/7 or nursing care support, students who had a preference for a college option within commuting distance of their home, and there was a group of folks who expressed dissatisfaction who also shared a belief that they were not prepared for college. And so it seemed that if someone had that belief that they were not prepared for college, they were more likely to say they were also dissatisfied with the current college options in our state. Moving on then to where would you prefer to attend college? So these questions really look at kind of the preferences for what students are interested in. So we'll talk about where, and then we'll talk about what type of school. 37% of, um, let me back up, the majority of students do say that they would prefer a college option within commuting distance of their home, followed by anywhere in Colorado, then less than a 4 hour drive from their home. A few students have no preference in the type of school, and then a very few group of students would like an out of state option, which I think we see with students across the board, regardless of disability. 37% of students who want to stay in Colorado for college would prefer an option anywhere in Colorado or within a 4 hour drive of their home. So while the majority do report a preference for within commuting distance of their home, there are still a significant number of students who would like an option that's within a 4 hour drive or anywhere in Colorado. In terms of the actual type of school, we asked students to select their most preferred option between junior college, religiously affiliated school, private university, vocational trade school, state university, community college. And then we also listed an option for students who are undecided because we hear from a lot of families that they're not sure what sort of option would be the preference. State University and community college tied with 33% of respondents selecting state university as their preference and 33% selecting community college as their preference. Then 17% of respondents selected trade or vocational school. What is also significant here is that no more than 5 students selected junior college, religiously affiliated school, or private university. So the numbers for those were very, very small. I think and we'll often hear from folks asking about potentially expansion to those sorts of schools. So I think it's pretty clear here that the preference is not necessarily for that type of school and really is more for trade and vocational, state, and community college. There's also the highest number of respondents, the highest group said that they were undecided, which suggests that there are a lot of different factors that go into deciding what sort of school they'd like to attend. We'll get into that in the next slide or in a couple slides, really looking at what factors informed their decision. But a lot more folks were able to say where they'd like to go to school in terms of location compared to the actual type of college. This slide is showing you then some of those variables. So respondents were presented with a list and they were able to check all that applied to them in terms of what is important in considering a college. You'll see the most important one here is I will have job skills and have employment opportunities. Then followed by I will further my social skills and I will further my independent living skills. And then there are plans in place to make sure I'm safe on campus. I think for inclusive higher education, this is significant because the model for inclusive higher education has four main pillars, being academics, social, career, and independence. Seeing that the responses also align with that, I think shows that families do have a preference for the sort of model that includes all of those different components, as opposed to potentially just the academics or just the social piece. It's really the whole college picture of having all of the opportunities that come with going to college. The least selected was the college has on campus housing options. And again, this kind of trends with a lot of folks saying that they would prefer a commuting option. And so most of the folks reporting they would like an on campus housing option are saying that they would like to live on campus. Yeah. Let's see. And I think we'll do questions in a couple more slides. I see there's a few things coming in the chat, and so I'll make sure to pause for those. In terms of the next category of questions, these were about care supports, really looking at medical and personal care support. Quite a few respondents commented in an open comment section about wanting some sort of support around organization or learning transportation or financial budgeting or social skills, different supports, kind of with, I would say, more of your day to day organization and just going through your day as a young adult. A lot of those are included with inclusive higher education as it is, as the supports that they provide. What we were really looking at with this question is going beyond that into more of the medical and hygiene and kind of personal care support. So these are things like nursing assistance, mobility support, medication management, and dressing and hygiene. 66% of all survey respondents reported some level of care support. The most common were medication management and dressing and hygiene support. I think in terms of thinking about what kind of this tells us, there's a couple things. With medication management, this may suggest a need for working more with families early on for students to start to develop some of those medication management behaviors if possible. With things like nursing assistance and mobility support and 24/7 or overnight support, I think that's a place where there's a lot more room to work on how you might be able to use something like Medicaid waivers to support you with independent living. We know some students who have been able to use more nursing assistance supports due to Medicaid waivers. At the same time, the schools have never had a student in Colorado with an intellectual disability who's accessing inclusive higher education who requires 24/7 or overnight support. What I would say in those cases is if you're working with a family or you are a family who's really worried about this piece, is to not let this be the final barrier to inclusive higher education. In would really like to work on developing more supports around this in collaboration with school partners on what that could look like. And if students can approach the schools and talk about what it might look like, I think they have a lot of information on how other students have navigated some of these things. Um, yeah, and I think the other piece that we really looked at was because they haven't had a student who requires 24/7 support, they haven't had the opportunity to really navigate what that might look like. So you might be thinking, that doesn't sound really great, Shelby. I'm not really sure about that. But I just encourage you to have families talk to the schools about what these supports could look like. If you're running into a lot of additional barriers, that's again a place where in sometimes can help do some navigation of what's going on. But this is a piece that we recognize a lot of students have these care support needs and would like to really work on addressing. Another piece that I really wanted to look at was, are there unique factors for students who want to live on campus? 72% of students who want to live away from home have some level of care support that they reported. So that's slightly higher than the just general survey respondents. One fifth of those actually require 24/7 or overnight support. And so I think I talked about that a little in the last slide, but really just highlighting again that students might have a wide range of care support needs, and that's okay. That is something that can be discussed with the schools to talk about how to navigate that, and means that we should not make an assumption about a student and their desire for where they want to live when it comes to college simply based on what level of care support they might need, because they're really across the board in what some of their options are. The same is true with state university. I think there can be an easy assumption that a student who wants to go to state university has selected that because they want to live on campus. In fact, 29% of students who would prefer to attend a state university would like that state university to be within commuting distance of their home. Then, when asked if they want to live on campus or they prefer to commute, they were really split in that answer. So, just the preference for state university doesn't give you a lot of context, and really requires, I think, asking some additional questions with families about what is driving that motivation and what is it that they're hoping to gain from that. One of the final areas on the survey was these belief statements. These are things like, I believe college will help increase my independence. I believe I could be successful in college. I believe college will help me with my career and employment after college. Really looking at kind of this idea of whether college is worth the investment, I think, is the easiest way to put it. The belief statements, for the most part, people were in agreement with. The one that is significantly different is, I believe that my K 12 education prepared me for college. Only 28% of respondents agreed that their K 12 education prepared them for college. And this is the only belief question where not sure outweighed the agree and disagree answers. I think we just point this out because overall, there's a lot of belief, it seems, in inclusive higher education, in why you might go to college, in some of the expected outcomes from going to college. But with the preparation for college, there is more disagreement in terms of whether folks feel they are prepared or not. Then one of the final categories was in terms of the financial aspect of college and looking at barriers that might come with that. This question was, have you or your family budgeted for college? 48% of families have budgeted and 45% have not budgeted. The families who have not budgeted, this is across all sorts of different household income levels. There's not a lot of trends in terms of who's budgeted or who has not. The other piece that relates here is that 25% of respondents were unable to pay at all for the cost of state university, really suggesting the need for more assistance with navigating a variety of financial resources. A common thing that came up was questions around kind of scholarships and other financial opportunities. There are some scholarships that may say a student needs to be degree seeking, or that they need to be working on a bachelor's degree or enrolled for full time, different variables. And we've seen in other states, as well as in a couple local cases, changes to those scholarship parameters when families have reached out and said, here's what inclusive higher education is. And so, and knowing that a good number of folks do need that financial support for college, and that a significant number of families have not budgeted, I think starting to really look at navigating those resources and looking at potential changes to some of those parameters that may be prohibiting access to a variety of resources is really important to consider. This slide is showing you some of those actual resources that students might use while they're in college. These would be things like ABLE accounts, benefits counseling, your community center board, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. If anyone wants to chat more about these, I'm always happy to set up a separate conversation about how these apply in college and things like that. But what we wanted to point out with this is, with students ages 15 and up, The most common ones that folks do not know about are your benefits counseling and ABLE accounts. There's I think, significant room for really working with families to understand what resources are out there and how those can be used and relate to college. Okay, so I'll pause momentarily and see if we have any questions before we get into these just trends that we saw.
So there's a question in the chat box of, is it possible to add safety as a pillar? And while I don't think that we are going to be changing the model and the pillars, I do think that safety is important. And Shelby, I think you can speak to some of that. I know that that came up here and there.
Mhm. Yeah, I would say that safety is a really big piece that does come up, and that the schools do have some things in place in terms of safety around campus and learning how to get around campus in terms of the supports on campus, but I think those aren't always readily apparent. So I think that's another place where there's room for growth in terms of just understanding what some of the supports look like. Tracy, was there something else you had in mind? Do you want to add to that?
No?
Okay. Uh, but yeah, I think that was common that when we had open boxes for folks to write in, they wrote in a lot of things that the schools may already be offering, but that might not be, again, really, really apparent. And I think that's something that I've seen too in working with students, that there are concerns around safety or just other things that happen, like if you get locked out of your room or if you get lost on campus or if you miss your bus, all sorts of different things that come up. And those are all things the schools work with students to make sure that they kind of know how to navigate when different scenarios do come up like that.
If you don't mind me just embellishing a little bit on that, I was going to ask that question. I think there's other kind of areas of supports that you addressed very clearly from the survey.
Mhm.
Things like medication or like all these other things are all really related to safety in so many ways. And so that's why I added it in there as a potential pillar, or even like the foundation of all the pillars for that matter, right? Because without that safety, then what, right? So that's really kind of, because I think so many of those other aspects, the common theme really is safety.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Thank you for elaborating on that. Okay, anything else? We're good? Okay, so this section then is just these trends that came up with different groups. So I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because then Tracy's going to talk about the next steps, which I think is the really important piece of this presentation. So in every aspect of the needs assessment, so all the things we just went through, there were some kind of subgroup within the intellectual disability population that had a unique need. And so this is just giving examples of where those things came up, things to pay attention to in INS work, things to potentially address, um, and just to recognize that there are these additional needs for specific populations. So when you're thinking about maybe talking to families, working with families, if you are a family, just thinking about how these might be coming into play. The first one is, like I said earlier, those students who do have 24/7 care support needs or nursing assistance do have higher levels of dissatisfaction with the current college options. The next one is that Black, Indigenous, and people of color families who identify as BIPOC were less likely to have budgeted for college. Again, just something to know as you're talking to families, working with families. With rural communities, there was a significant number of folks who gave comments to the likes of having some sort of hesitation around sending a student to a larger city that wasn't similar to their city. So if you're going from a more rural area, especially into Denver, I think is a common one, that there's more reservation around that. And then a stronger preference for having a local option in an area that's similar to where the student is from. Younger students who are under 15 are far less likely to know about the college options that exist in Colorado, so suggesting a need for really working to reach those younger families to raise that awareness so that they can start to plan, to budget, all of those things early on. For looking at students who prefer a trade or vocational school, the preference tends to have a higher priority on developing job skills and having employment opportunities. So again, just another thing to know. kind of what might be playing into some of that decision. And individuals with non-chromosomal disabilities, so individuals with disabilities. I think Down syndrome was one of the most common disabilities in this category. So students who did not have Down syndrome, students with autism, and a variety of other disabilities were slightly less likely to believe they would be successful in college. So again, just something interesting that came up as a trend within the survey to note. We also conducted listening sessions in areas where we had less responses, and then really tried to hone in on trends that came up, whether in those listening sessions or just within the survey respondents. So I'll go through those quickly to give you some regional differences in Colorado as well. Within the Denver metro area, 82% of people who selected a college option anywhere in Colorado were from the metro area. So basically, respondents who live in the Denver metro area are more likely than respondents from other regions to want to go anywhere in Colorado, to go within a 4-hour drive, to go anywhere in Colorado, maybe even to go out of state. Within the Pikes Peak and Northern Colorado regions, while those are distinctly different regions, there were commonalities in the types of responses we received from those regions. So I put them together here. Both of them have inclusive higher education options in their area. So you have UNC in Greeley, UCCS in Colorado Springs. Over half of the respondents in those areas selected a commuting option and identified transportation as a significant barrier. So while there are communities that are close by to some extent, for example, Fort Collins to Greeley or Pueblo to Colorado Springs, families did not feel like that commute was possible due to transportation barriers. And so still had a preference for an even more local option. And then there was a need in both regions for more information with it for K-12 families, for students of all different types of disabilities, as well as professionals to know more about the options available in our state. For the Western Slope and Mountain region, again, separate areas, but similar in their responses, so they're combined here. 35% of respondents preferred a non-commuting option. So again, some flexibility in how far from home they would want to go. And all of those students had a preference for living on campus, but were split in their type of school. So similar to what we saw with other respondents. 65% of respondents would prefer a commuting option and were also split on where they would live, whether that would be on campus or at home. And I think this kind of gives some context for one of the barriers in general with expansion is really trying to find what is a common ground for what the preference is for school type and location. And there's a lot of variability, especially in what we saw with respondents from the Western Slope and Mountain region in terms of location and housing options available. And then only 15% of respondents expressed satisfaction with current options, which was less than in other regions, most likely because there is not a current local option in that area. The last unique piece with this region is that families in Grand Junction specifically were less likely than any other area in the Western Slope or Mountain region to report that they knew about college and had heard about college from their school. Just something that was slightly different than other areas. So that brings us then to the conclusion. So I will turn it back over to Tracy as Executive Director to just talk about what some of those next steps are.
Okay, so I guess the question is, what do we do now? So as our role is to work towards expansion and work to sort of identify these gaps and address them. And so from this survey, I think we were hopeful to get our marching orders, and I think that we did. So the first thing that we're going to look at is how do we address the barriers to the current options? We know that we as alone can't do it. And so we are using some of the survey respondents to identify what community partners do we need to partner with to start addressing some of these. One of the biggest ones, as Shelby mentioned, was the increased access and awareness around medical supports, especially those who are living on campus. And for us, that's looking, can we use Medicaid waivers? Are there agencies in the area who can provide these supports, and working with the schools to partner with them? The other big area that we feel like is a barrier is the family's knowledge of the resources that can support that. And so not only supporting those medical and care needs, but also just in general, supporting students while they're in college, after college, and really getting families and students connected with them early so they can take advantage of those supports and understand what's available to them. Closing the enrollment gap between the white and Hispanic Latino students. As you saw, that was pretty stark in our current enrollments as well as our survey respondents. So we know statewide that there is a high percentage of students with intellectual disabilities who identify as Hispanic or Latino, and we know that we're not reaching them. And so what do we need to do that? What community partners are available in regions that can assist us in that, who understand the community and can work with us to do that? One of the largest things was addressing that intersection of college disability and transportation. And so, as you all know, we cannot put a college in every city and every region in our state to ensure that everyone can have a commuting distance. So how do we address that? We need to look at where we're going to expand that we could make the most impact, but also look at that transportation piece and understand, is it transportation or is it fear of the student moving away? And what sort of things do we need to do in the K through 12 and in preparation to make families and students feel more comfortable with maybe being an hour or two away from home or 4 hours away from home, and that they're safe, as Kim said, and able to be successful. And then the last one is the awareness of financial resources. That seems to be a barrier of budgeting. And so we need to ensure that that information is getting out there sooner for families to start budgeting, but also make people aware that there are financial resources. The schools have financial aid, there are scholarships, as Shelby said. All of it is new to the state, right? And so oftentimes it's just asking those financial resources, hey, do you know about this? And would you consider shifting your guidelines and rules? And oftentimes it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that they don't know that they should. And so it's really partnering with those organizations to open up some more of those resources. The next part, and Shelby should actually be talking about this because she's our education outreach coordinator, so this is her role, but I will. We know from the survey that the K through 12 system is not speaking to college options. It was very clear. And so we need to do better in working with the K through 12 system to create that culture of lifelong learning, to get past the idea that after they're 18 or 21 after transition, that's kind of it. We need to make sure that there are no cliffs there and that people can continue their lifelong learning, whether it's in inclusive higher ed or not, just having that notion that life goes on after K through 12 and start to have those conversations earlier. Infusing the information about college as part of K through 12, I think we've talked about that a lot. And we will continue to do that work, educating districts, partnering with school districts, educating teachers. Shelby just this past month partnered with Denver Public Schools, and they created a continuing ed credit program where teachers can go through modules and get about inclusive higher ed and get their continuing ed credits. So it's just continuing to expand that awareness and information to the K through 12 system. The next one is about belief. I found it super interesting that the belief question was different via different disabilities. And so I think that it's been a lift for us over the 5 years to create that belief in the K through 12 system, in families, in community partnerships, even in our college partners, our future college partners, to say like we all share a common belief that this is possible and this can happen. We just need to put in the supports. And I think that our graduates and our current students who are enrolled are showing that. And I think that belief will continue to change. The last one is just building interest. So as we talk about expansion, there's lots of people who need to be involved in doing that. And so we love that so many families filled out this survey and clearly have an interest. And we want to make their voices heard, that there's an interest in this. We also heard in some of our listening sessions that professionals really said, I don't always tell my families about it. Or we'll have teachers who say, well, I told one of my students about it, but that's probably the only one who would be successful. And we want to curtail that and say it is possible. It's possible for more people than you think. We don't want to not disseminate information based on assumptions that we as professionals may have. Next. So the big question that always gets asked, and it's time to expand. And so we know there's a need for greater access closer to home and in other regions of the state. Like I said before, it is not possible for us to have a college program in every city in every area of our state. So what are we going to do? First step is we need to have colleges who want to open their doors. We have talked with a handful of colleges in our state, across the state, who have interest, but it takes a lot of buy-in for those colleges to actually do it. It's not as easy as just saying, "Oh, we'd like to have the students come." There's so many components and intricacies involved in setting that up. So one of the things we want to do is start to create small work groups in those areas to start the conversation. So whether it's Western Slope, Southern Colorado, more northern, or even in Denver, we need to start creating those small work groups of people who are interested in expansion, who can help us sort of champion the effort in the area. Again, we often just get, "Hey, we'd like to start a program." So I wanted to really present in this presentation that there is a $400,000 price tag on starting one of these programs, and it's over the course of 5 years. Our prior legislation that we had did fund that for our 3 schools, and they are now sustainable and ready to rock and roll. We are going back to the legislation in the fall, we as INAR, to look for some more expansion dollars or some more permanent funding for inclusive higher ed. So fingers crossed that we're successful in that. And then IN also does fundraising efforts. We had a large corporate donation set for expansion given to us last year, which we were super grateful for. And so we continue to fundraise so the schools can do this. And the last part I mentioned, and this still goes along it's not as easy as some might think to expand, is that many of the departments on the college campus have to be involved. And so where it's been successful is where there are champions in each of the areas of a college: financial aid, admissions, housing, all of the academics, the professors, everyone involved. It's much more successful if you have that buy-in from all of the areas of your campus. And the last thing that IN is committing to is to create the how-to manual for our expansion schools. We have the financials, we have what needs to happen, we have the departments on board. And so creating that manual so we can approach a new college or university partner and say, "This is how you do it," and here it is. With all of the lessons learned and things that we've learned over the past 5 years in starting this up. So I just wanted to end with a couple things of what IN is going to continue to do. Our role, like Shelby said at the beginning, is really to be that overarching advocate for inclusive higher ed in our state. Some of the more specific things that we do is we continually work to develop and maintain quality self-sustaining options. So whether that means at our existing partner schools or at our expansion schools, the two keys that we look at is a quality program and financially self-sustaining. We also now, since 2020, have graduates. So we have had two graduation seasons, and we're really working to evaluate those student outcomes and see what's working, what's not, what do we need to go back and correct if students are, unprepared in one area or prepared in another, and then really sharing those positive outcomes that we've had with employment and independent living and getting that word out there to show that this does work. So not only is it an option, but hey, look, it really works. Implementing the best practices, I think we've talked about. IN also is committed to continuing to lead the consortium for statewide stakeholders. And that includes our partner schools, but it also includes representatives from Department of Higher Ed or Division of Voc Rehab and Healthcare Policy Financing, those kinds of things, really leading that group to continue to talk about all of these things: expansion, all of the gaps, how we can address them, barriers that exist, financial aid, all of those things, and really developing the best inclusive higher ed programs that we can. Talked about the financial sustainability, but that's really important. You can't have a program that needs continual funding. It's got to sustain itself, and that's been proven to be successful at our current partners, and so we believe that we can replicate that. Shelby will keep on her role of doing outreach. She does it for awareness, but really at the end of the day, it's to provide the enrollment to the colleges so families are aware. But that is her whole world of providing that information. And then obviously we will continue to promote expansion. Last slide is just in case there's anyone who would want to get involved in our efforts, we would love anyone to be a part of it. Ways that you can get involved is you can join our board of directors. We're always looking for members who can help oversee in and what it does. We also have a young professionals board. And then we have committees. So you don't necessarily have to be on a board, but we have committees that approach the legislation, do outreach, do expansion, do events and fundraising. And those are committees that we love to have more volunteers on, especially from across the state. Like as we talk about expansion potentially out of the Denver metro area, we look for volunteers in regions that maybe we aren't as familiar with because we're located in Denver. Then we also have our school district and community agency partnerships. So we're always looking for people to help us get word out. Shelby does a lot of student panels. She does a lot of family presentations, teacher trainings. She has developed college and career curriculum that we'd love to expand to different school districts. We also have a mentorship program where we have our current college students who are mentoring high school students with intellectual disabilities. And we run that program 2 to 3 times a year to just give high school students a way to see people who they can relate to succeeding in college and getting them excited about it. And then the last place to help would be that reaching those elementary and middle school families. Became clear that 15 was kind of the age where people started to know about it. And I believe wholeheartedly that you got to start planning for college much sooner. And so getting that word out there. And then of course we're a nonprofit. And so we're always taking donations and raising money to continue our work and our efforts. So this is who we are, our contact information, and then the school websites of our current programs in case someone doesn't know about them and wants to learn more. The last thing I'll note is that this presentation, Shelby's going to be sending it out and making it available on our website. And we also have our full needs assessment report, which is a lovely light read of 42 pages, I think it is. But if you want to dive deeper into our needs assessment and look at it more thoroughly, we will have that available on our website as well. So there we go.
Okay, so I will stop the recording now.